This week's Torah portion is Shoftim, or Judges. It's about how Israel will establish a society that is fair and just. There are rules for setting up a judicial system where judges are impartial and the witnesses are faithful. There are rules to ensure that kings do not abuse their power. There are even rules for the just way to engage in warfare. And the Parsha opens with one of the Torah's most famous lines, a thesis statement for the rules that follow. Tzedek, tzedek tirdof. Justice, justice shall you pursue. Tzedek is repeated twice for emphasis. And justice is not just something we hope or pray for, it's something elusive that we must pursue. And mixed in with all these rules about a fair society is a whole passage that might seem out of place. The rules against witchcraft. When you come into the land that God is giving you, do not learn to do the repulsive practices of other nations. Let no one be found among you who is an augur, a soothsayer, a diviner, a sorcerer, one who casts spells, one who consults with ghosts or inquires of the dead. In reading this, a number of questions come to mind. Of course, one might ask, what does all this have to do with creating a just society, with tzedek, tzedek tirdof? But when I read this, an even more urgent question comes immediately to my mind. If Jews are commanded to distance themselves from sorcery and witchcraft, then can a Jew like Harry Potter? If there is any question that the witches and wizards of Harry Potter would be covered by this commandment, one need only to look at the Rashi on the verse where he defines a diviner as, quote, someone who holds a stick and consults it. It's hard not to picture Harry, Ron, and Hermione casting spells with their wands when you read that. I mean, there's even a whole class at Hogwarts about divination, and now I'm thinking to myself, should I not be reading this stuff? Because Harry Potter was, for a long time, a pretty big part of my identity. I grew up in the height of the Harry Potter craze. I remember lining up before midnight so that I could be amongst the first to buy book 4. I was a counselor at camp the summer that book 5 dropped, and it was banned at summer camp because nobody would leave their cabins otherwise. I also recall that we told the kids we got an advance copy and that Harry died, which in retrospect was very mean. It's a good thing the High Holy Days are coming up. When books 6 and 7 came out, I remember endless debates about Horcruxes and Snape's allegiances on my college campus. None of this is particularly unique for someone of my generation, but my fandom went a little bit further than that. When I went to pick out cufflinks for this evening, I had multiple Harry Potter options to choose from. I went with my golden snitches, if you're wondering. This is a risky thing to admit, but at more than one Comic-Con, I have cosplayed as Anthony Goldstein, the only canonically Jewish character at Hogwarts. When we decorated my first daughter's nursery, it was Harry Potter themed. Instead of a mobile, we had winged keys flying above her head. Annie's and my wands are displayed above her crib, ready for us to run in and defend her in the unlikely event of a dark wizard attack. Annie and I are an intermarriage. I'm a Gryffindor, she's a Hufflepuff. So all 4 house banners hang in Ella's room. It's pretty epic. But now I'm reading all this stuff in Deuteronomy and I'm starting to think, have I made a horrible mistake? Is a rabbi forbidden from partaking in these stories of witchcraft and wizardry? And worse, am I indoctrinating my children into lives of soothsaying and divination? The Talmud notes a small detail in the opening verse of this section. It does not say you shall not learn these practices, but rather you shall not learn to do these practices. From this, Rav infers that one is permitted to learn about sorcery in order to understand it, but one may not go so far as to practice it. Rav Kook, the first chief rabbi of pre-state Israel, explains this concept further. A sorcerer seeks to understand the relationship between nature and the divine, which both reside in the human soul, and the sorcerer can choose to suppress the godliness in themselves in order to gain power over nature. Rav Kook says that this knowledge might be useful to a Jew who wants to understand his own soul because it helps us to make the opposite choice, to embrace the parts of ourselves that are reflections of God. The part of ourself that is B'Tselem Elohim, created in God's image. And so, according to Rav Kook, we are permitted to learn about witchcraft, just not to practice it. And this is helpful to me because my affection for Harry Potter goes much deeper than just thinking I look good in crimson and gold Gryffindor apparel. I like the themes of the books, the triumph of good over evil. I love the message of chosen family and strength through adversity. All of these seem like valuable and deeply Jewish ideas to talk about. Voldemort ignores those he deems as less powerful or less worthy, like Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Neville, and this is why he loses in the end. This sounds a lot to me like the line from Psalm 118, the stone that the builders rejected becomes the chief cornerstone. And I don't always come to the same conclusions that the books do about what evil is or where it comes from or if people are capable of redemption. But those are fruitful arguments, and I think Rav Kook is saying that those arguments are valuable, that we can learn something about our own ideas by contrasting them with others. I am forbidden to cast a spell myself, but I benefit from debates about the morality of forbidden curses. Rav Kook makes a distinction between a sorcerer and a heretic, someone he calls the Gidufi. A sorcerer focuses his mind on the questions of the essence of evil, but the Gidufi does not reveal any hidden knowledge. In fact, he rejects truth and goodness and embraces lies about the nature of humanity and God. We have something we can learn from the wizard, but the Gidufi, the heretic, has nothing to teach us. Because here's the truth of why I have struggled with my Harry Potter obsession of late. Honestly, it's not because the Torah forbids me to learn about witchcraft. I know I can read fiction about spells without becoming a dark wizard myself. The real reason why I've been reluctant to wear my Gryffindor t-shirts or my platform 9 3/4 cufflinks in public has nothing to do with Harry Potter and everything to do with its author. The creator of Harry Potter has in recent years said some things that I find truly abhorrent, that hurt and endanger people I love and care about. In particular, she has used her incredible resources and platform to deny the rights of transgender people, to call them dangerous and evil. And in doing so, to my mind, she places herself much closer to the Gidufi on Rav Kook's spectrum. Our Helfman curriculum is based on instilling Jewish values. And the value that we will focus on for the first quarter of this year is that concept of B'Tselem Elohim, the affirmation that every person is created in the image of God. And this means loving and respecting and valuing all the differences that make us unique, and knowing that each of those differences is itself a reflection of the expansiveness of God. This means making sure that transgender and non-binary members of our community know that they too are beloved children of God and that they too belong here. If we are to live up to the Torah portion's ideal of tzedek tirdof, it means joining hands with those who are oppressed and marginalized and speaking out when they are threatened. It is deeply ironic that so many people have learned a message of tolerance from books by an author who has demonstrated such a blind spot in her own ability to empathize. And it does compel one to think back through the books to identify other blind spots as well. Other minorities, including Jews who do not get the same empathy as the Muggle-born. How lonely must Hogwarts have been for Anthony Goldstein or Cho Chang? Are there anti-Semitic stereotypes in the depiction of goblin bankers? And does she wrestle enough with the implications of house elf slavery or anti-giant bias? And this is, I think, the essence of what Rav Kook wants to teach us. To the extent that Harry Potter books are a wonderful, engaging way to ask big questions about who we are and how we stand up for justice, then they are useful tools, especially if we're willing to see the faults and limitations of them. But to the extent that my Hogwarts sweater or my baby Muggle on board bumper sticker might make you think that I am a Gidufi, that I deny God's image in anyone, but especially the vulnerable, then I have a problem. Because that's the message of the opening lines of this parsha, tzedek tirdof. Justice cannot just be something we wait for. It has to be something we pursue, that we build together. So let's agree to read Harry Potter and not feel bad about enjoying it, because we know it's teaching us to do the work of justice, to stand up to evil and oppression and totalitarianism. To stand up to evil and oppression and totalitarianism, we must be as brave as a Gryffindor, as compassionate as a Hufflepuff, as thoughtful as a Ravenclaw, as strategic as a Slytherin. In that way, we are learning about witchcraft exactly as the rabbis of the Talmud envisioned, in order to learn and to teach. But let us read these books critically, knowing that their ideology may be flawed, and that one should not base one's entire identity around a kid's book about magic. And we can endeavor to make this temple better even than Hogwarts. Not just because we have more Jews than Anthony Goldstein. We can make this place a place where we don't sort people into categories of good and bad. We can make this a place that affirms every person for the wholeness of who they are, that asserts that everyone is indeed created b'tselem Elohim, that everyone here belongs. We can ensure that bias and bullying have no home here. We can make this place a place that stands with all marginalized groups in their fight against oppression. Because in that way, we will live up to the true messages of both books, of Harry Potter and the Torah, to pursue justice and fight for a better world. Accio justice, I say. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may it be so.